In civil affairs, your success depends on getting the right information to the right people at the right time. Whether it's foundational information for a team about to head out on a mission or putting together a map or other data visualization to brief a general or an ambassador, Tesla Government Solutions and staff can help. With Tesla Government's knowledge management solutions, you're adding a strategic partner that helps unleash the full power and potential of your information. Let us unpack your data and put your knowledge to work. Learn more at teslagov.com.
I'm just amazed, how analytic our CAA soldiers have become. And it used to be onesies and twosies across the force. But now this skill set has been so professionalized, it's almost uniform across the CA ranks and files at this point. That is a great fit.
Welcome to the One CA podcast by the Civil Affairs Association. I'm your host for today's episode, Arnell David, and we are excited to have with us Mr. Duan Lee from Signal Labs. Duan is no stranger to our community. He has had National Science Foundation Awards to develop computational network models of economic, political dynamics, and emergence. He has served with the McChrystal Group, taught at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, which he has led lots of research there, as well as taught many of our military officers, and he's now at Signal Labs. So, Mr. Duan Lee, welcome, sir. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Been always a big fan and supporter of civil affairs, so this is really my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, why don't we begin with Signal Labs, sir? So what is it Signal Labs is about and what you're doing there? You can tell our listeners.
I think that's a good place to start. So Signal Lab is the world's leading impact intelligence analytic company. So we offer a SaaS platform. And I can give you three true statements about Signal Labs. One is that we ingest the most diverse digital media data sources. And number two, we enrich all these unstructured data points through our pipeline. And then we enrich them so they can be queryable and analyzable. And number three, we put all these different enriched data sources onto the same analytic platform where people can really compare how conversations are shaped on different media platforms so they can see how information propagates over time and space, which also includes misinformation and disinformation. For example, we are ingesting about 10 million mentions online about the coronavirus. And of course, this is how I can detect and analyze a lot of disinformation about the pandemic stemming from the CCP, the Kremlin, the RGC, and the likes, right? And some of our use cases, especially for the US federal government and DoD, include force protection, threat detection, narrative analysis, situational awareness, and then most importantly, understanding how state-sponsored narratives travel and propagate through different media platforms, sometimes coming all the way to our shores to affect our organic discourse as well as political process. So that's what our company is really known for, and we have a large number of federal government end users. SOCOM is one of them, the Secret Service, and the like. So we work very closely with the federal government in order to protect the integrity of our information environment. And in terms of what I do at Signal Labs, I'm in charge of research and strategy. Just to unpack that position, what I do is threefold. First, I work closely with US government stakeholders to think about, how to think about information statecraft, right? So I work very closely with policy principals and government stakeholders to really think about what it means to, execute the national security strategy in the information environment. Number two, I work very closely with research and development agencies to continue to pioneer what kind of solutions we need to compete well against our peer adversaries in the information space. So I work very closely with the national labs in terms of data integration and data visualizations, right? And number three is something that I care deeply about, and that is content development. I work very closely with SOCOM entities and DoD entities to produce cutting-edge analytic reports on how our peer adversaries use information, misinformation, and disinformation as part of their revisionist efforts. So that's what I do at Signal Labs.
Wow, that is incredible. So is it, so you said a lot you service the, the federal government a lot, but I also noticed on the website, you guys have a lot of private companies, commercial industry types that you service as well, right?
Yeah, that's
Is there a
correct.
balance? Is it
Yeah,
mostly
so
government or mostly private?
I think right now probably is 50-50,
Yeah.
because I think some of the solutions are very comparable. So if you think about risk intelligence, so a lot of our federal government agencies use our technology for executive protection. But our Fortune 500 executives face similar risk factors. So there is a lot of overlapping solutions. So yes, we have quite a few Fortune 500 customers as well, and they use our platform to shape their proactive messaging. So in terms of their PR, campaign management, and things like that. So I would say it's a really healthy 50-50 balance at this point.
Okay. Yeah, I saw on LinkedIn your recent interview on battling against malign influence, and you mentioned that we need strategic integration on technology, research and development, and procurement, which I like to hear. That we need presidential leadership and the National Security Council to focus on these challenges. Can you expand on this?
Yeah,
I think those are some good ideas, and there's a lot of big things there that we need to attack.
yeah. I think that's a really good question. And clearly this is something that I deeply care about. I like to learn from our adversaries from time to time. I think this is what H.R. McMaster called strategic empathy. And in this case,
I like
the
that.
Chinese
Yeah.
Communist Party has a really good example, and that is they run the Science and Technology Commission under the Central Military Committee. And it sounds militaristic, but essentially the Central Military Committee is their version of our National Security Council. So what they do is running this advisory council on a yearly basis that includes government officials, technologists, as well as private sector and industry stakeholders. So essentially, it works as a strategic hub of integrating technology with essentially foreign policy objectives. And to me, dictators will always have an upper hand when it comes to integrating technology with strategy. That's not what I'm suggesting. But what I'm suggesting here is that we have a lot of domain specific innovation boards, right? So a lot of people in this environment are familiar with the Defense Innovation Board, DARPA, IARPA, and there's a whole slew of this organization. DIU belongs to the Defense Innovation Board. The National Security Innovation Network also belongs to the Defense Innovation Board. And we have, AHEP works, SOFWorks, the whole 9 yards. The problem is that they focus too much on technology harvesting as opposed to what I call techno-strategic integration. So we have a lot of bespoke organizations that are busy procuring the cutting edge technology, but there is no strategic oversight dictating which strategic requirements really should prioritize which types of technology and so on and so forth. So to me, this function really belongs to the National Security Council, because I think right now our Defense Innovation Board entities are too domain specific. And that is, at least in DoD, we talk about multi-domain operations. So this has been going on for a while. So we're trying to collapse different domains to have the best war-fighting capability. But that notion has not spilled over to how to integrate the best technological solutions yet. So I think that conversation has to take place right now.
I guess that's the challenge with democracies and our bureaucracies. It's a challenge to cohere all that. So you see it being at the National Security Council level, forcing that being the forcing function for that integration. It's beautiful.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do. In fact, I'll just share some nuggets.
Sure.
On one hand, it is no secret that we have a new senior directorate in the National Security Council. I'm not going to name what it is in this open channel, but we do have a new senior directorate in the National Security Council responsible for this kind of integrative, approach, right? So that's great news. We actually better at this than autocratic and authoritarian regimes, at least in my assessment, because once we set these institutions, this integrative whole of society institutions, I think we are much better at managing this institution to serve public good as opposed to individual dictators' needs and whims and so on and so forth. I know there is this big conversation that perhaps democracies are always disadvantageous to dictatorships when it comes to using the best technologies to advance foreign policy objectives. I tend to think that's not entirely true, historically speaking. If you look at the origin of DARPA, if you look at the Manhattan Project, if you look at the origin of IARPA, once we set up these institutions, I think we can go much faster than our revisionist adversaries.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, it's a good insight. I mean, you can't force, it's hard to force creativity and innovation and collaboration, the things that would come about with the dictatorship and trying to drive it and force it. So I think you're right. And I guess that leads to we were talking at the national strategic level. Let's go back down to the Department of Defense level. And it seems like we have a challenge with, and especially in the Civil Affairs Committee, we're starting to see now that we need to be more a part and integrate better with our information related capabilities. Our activities, the things that we're doing, everything matters, and it's about cohering that. In the United States, I think some of our other Western countries are starting to have a challenge where, what does this information domain mean? Who owns it? You have Army Cyber Command now saying that they're going to be the Information Warfare Command. You have the State Department has their Global Engagement Center. And then, of course, you've worked with all these commands to include SOCOM. And how do we go forward optimally with these information and influence capabilities? Who should own and cohere them? I expect your opinion on this, because you've kind of mixed in all these different worlds.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. We can talk about the Cyberspace Solarium Commission or the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, and even within DoD, we have the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. So at the strategic level, we are setting up this important hubs and shops to strategize how to use information related capabilities in support of the national security strategy. And I think that process is slowly trickling down. It's taken some time, but I'm really encouraged to see this new senior directorate in the National Security Council that's going to have a very broad mandate to essentially align different capabilities to fight well for information statecraft. So that piece is coming together. I'm comfortable with that. So let me move down to the operational level a little bit. Even though people may feel a little bit frustrated in terms of how we employ information operations related capabilities, I feel like we're doing better than most people realize, because again, between 2015 and 18, we were able to experiment with several models against the Islamic State that combine both cyber and OSINT elements. So those who are in the know should know what I'm talking about. And this was a really, one of the best kept secrets in our arsenal. And that is, we essentially brought in cyber experts, OSINT experts, and 2X experts, just regular 2 experts, 3X. And then we create this really agile organization. And it was essentially manned by a couple of generals, right? And it was a real thing that was doing real damage to the Islamic State. So this is still in our muscle memory. And I think for those who are following this conversation, should know that now we are sort of broadening this concept and we call it the IWTF construct, and that is Information Warfare Task Force. And of course, if you look at our US code, this is not very hard to do for DoD, especially, declared, theater of conflict, we own this space. So that is not something that's surprising, but I can tell you with confidence that now we are expanding this IWTF construct to ODTech environments as well. So this is why I say we're not doing too bad. Actually, we're doing okay, right? So if you think about how we are setting up task forces in an ODTech environment to go after great power competition. So we've been making some progress in this regard. I think what we need to do is, meeting in the middle. So at the strategic level, there's some policy decisions that are trickling down. At the operational level, we've been setting up new organizational structures to go after information statecraft. But there is a gap between strategic and operational levels. I think that's the seam that we need to codify, and then I think we'll be fine. I'm actually very optimistic. I mean, it is not as fast as it could be, but this is a liberal democracy. Nothing is supposed to be as fast as authoritarian regimes. But all things considered, I think we're doing pretty okay. We're doing okay.
That's good to hear. I'm glad you hear the optimistic view. And the British here, who I work with, those task forces, I mean, they call them information maneuver groups. And so I think they have similarity there. So let's go on to the
I'll
next.
give you a data point that should uplift a lot of us in this community, and that it is, I talk to Dan Kimmage at the Global Engagement Center from time to time. People may have some frustrations with the GEC, but it's a new entity. And I think they're doing okay. And I think, they're trying to go as forward as they can. So we're essentially building a lot of, liaison elements for information statecraft. Compared to 5 years ago, this is an entirely different IA, interagency environment. And I think we're doing okay. I think we're doing better. We are not as good as we could be, but compared to 5 years ago, I think we've come a long way.
This session's gonna be like a therapy session for us all that are. It's good to hear all this good stuff. Okay, so I follow a lot of your work for quite some time, Duan. When you were teaching at the Naval Postgraduate School, I was always curious about the social network analysis or analytics that you've done there. What are some of the? If you can just quickly go over some of those projects that you're most proud of that you worked on there, the research. Because I know you were there for quite some time and helping special operations in the combatant commands.
Yeah, so no kidding. I don't know whether you remember, Colonel Peter, Schmidt, and
I remember. I knew him. Yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah, and he's at Indiana University right now. But I work closely with him, and also I work very closely with a lot of amazing CAA officers. And in fact, some of my best projects involve CAA soldiers. So I'll give you two sort of, projects that I recall fondly every time I get a chance. And I think, first one is essentially using a lot of open source data and social media data to, map and illuminate CCP affiliated and Kremlin affiliated, assets and networks in the Baltics, and in contested areas in East Asia, such as Mongolia, Taiwan, the Korean Peninsula, right? And to me, this really, captures the essence of global, great power competition. It's not about having an end state, but constantly occupying more space in a contested area, whether there's the human domain, the physical domain, information domain. It's really about whether you have a better position on those domains compared to our peer adversaries. So I work with a lot of CIMIC teams as well as SIOP teams to essentially illuminate pro-CCP and pro-Kremlin local auxiliary and networks, especially media outlets, media personalities. They were essentially propagating pro CCP and pro-Kremlin conversations online and also in the physical domain as well. So that was something that I was really proud of. And the second project is essentially using this analytic result to show our allies and our partner nations the extent of revisionist threats they were facing. So, I work very closely with Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Mongolia, Taiwan, and, let's just say the Korean Peninsula. One of the things that I'm really proud of is that we were able to use this analytic products to convince them that they had to update their national defense strategies and plans to address steady state revisionist threats. I'm very proud of working especially with SACPAC and SACUR. And I'll give you another example from SACPAC. So I work very closely with our embassy in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, worked with their general staff. We essentially gave them a series of workshops on threats coming from the PRC. Essentially, we were able to convince them to rewrite their national defense strategy, which we did. And I was
pivotal. That's huge. Yeah, that's big.
And they essentially completely revamped their national defense strategy to focus on the PRC. And we presented these results and additional, analytic projects to their National Security Council in the presidential, palace in Ulaanbaatar. Wow. And I brought soft officers with me and other subject matter experts with me. And they were one CA officer, one, IO officer, one, and a couple of special forces officers. And we presented this case to their National Security Council staff. 6 months later, their president essentially approved the revised national security strategy.
That's amazing.
And we were able to essentially improve our strategic interoperability with the Mongolian government. Yeah, so I think that's something that I find incredibly rewarding. And
yeah, that's on your bio there. You need to put that rewriting other countries' national defense strategy.
No, but that's something that I share only with sort of my military friends.
Sure.
Because I don't want to get hacked by Chinese.
Don't be a target. When you're in Mongolia, did you go flying? I know a lot of our guys when they go over there, they get a lot of good, cool photos flying eagles or hawks. Did you get to do some of that?
That's I was severely abused by the SOF team in Ulaanbaatar, so I didn't get to see a lot of the countryside.
Oh no, okay, yeah.
Yeah, but I think what I find most rewarding is that from RSOF 2022, I was just talking to General Cleveland, and we really emphasize these notions of resistance and resilience, especially not for us, but for our allies and our partner nations. So we're trying to help them to become more resilient, more resistant to the revisionist states like the PRC, the Russian Federation, and the IRGC, North Korea. It went from a concept to a series of real serious strategic engagements where we were able to come up with more interoperability and essentially give them more resilience as well as resistance potential. And to me, this is something that we do better than anybody else. Speaking of which, I think that is the space that civil affairs has pioneered and developed better than anybody else in the entire force. So I'm really, really proud of those projects.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That's a good point. I mean, I think one thing that we do well is we take for granted is people like you and other friends at our network. I know Nick Crowley and Dr. Alex Desick, some others that are constantly helping us out. Or it's just power of these non-traditional relationships and expanding on them in these networks.
Everywhere you look, there's a barrage of emails and information telling you what everybody has done, is doing, or plans to do, all in excruciating detail. But access is only half the battle. You also need information presented in a usable form. But that takes work, and the more information you have, the more work it takes. Tesla government takes on these issues so that your office or agency can fully exploit the data you already have. Our knowledge management experts organize and curate your internal data. Our open source research augments your knowledge base with strategic insights from our globally experienced team. And our data visualization turns complex data into compelling visuals, while our community building makes sure everyone benefits by leveraging collective knowledge. With Tesla Government's knowledge management solutions, you are adding a strategic partner that helps unleash the full power and potential of your institutional information. Let us unpack your data and put your knowledge to work. Learn more at teslagov.com.
So closing out with some final questions, sir.
Yeah.
So you spent a lot of time with the teaching our SOF officers, special forces officers, psychological operations officers at MPS, and then you've done work at Bragg and in all those different countries. So where do you see things going? What are the things that we're doing right? How can we improve as a community? Final thoughts.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things, what, let's unpack that question in three sort of elements, growth, what CA is doing right, and where perhaps CA could improve. I've seen a tremendous amount of growth in the CA community in two areas. One is professionalization, and the other one is strategic realization. So let me start with professionalization. So I've seen the evolution of the CA pipeline in the past, perhaps, let's just say 7, 8 years. And I think it all started with General Cleveland trying to articulate special warfare, and CA was first to enter the call. In special warfare, managing relationships is probably the most critical skill set. And I think we didn't have that skill set arsenal before perhaps 2012. And CA has come a long way. Teaching is cadre about how to assess the human domain, how to assess a social environment, how to identify, key leaders or key stakeholders in a foreign environment, how to approach them, how to run analytics, and how to manage those relationships, how to essentially maintain some kind of, data-driven, analytics about these engagements and so on and so forth. So perhaps in the past 3 years, whenever I go overseas to support the real doers, I'm just amazed, how analytic our CA soldiers have become. And it used to be onesies and twosies across the force, but now this skill set has been so professionalized, it's almost uniform across the CA ranks and files at this point. That is a great feat. I mean, absolutely. It's not perfect, but we've come a long way in terms of being more professionally CA proficient. So I think that's
even the NCOs are just, and when people ask me about our Army, now that I've been over here for quite some time, I just tell them that, what makes our Army different is they have professionalism or non-commissioned officer corps. I mean, our NCOs give us that edge by far, especially in civil affairs.
Yes,
high intellect.
You give them a few programs, and then you give them a few CSV files, and then the things that they come up with.
CSV files. Yeah.
I'm not kidding. I mean, we've come a long way in terms of how professional our CA soldiers have become. I don't think it is being sufficiently appreciated across the board. And number two, strategic realization, and that is, I'm going to talk about this a bit more later on, but typically CA teams have a little bit more freedom of movement, especially in overseas environments. And they become so much better at working from the embassy platform and essentially using their equities to gain more access and placement within the embassy platform to go after big, objectives and big operations. Of course, well nested with the rest of the SOF team and everybody else. But yeah. I've seen essentially CA becoming a strategic asset in an interagency environment. And this was not the case 5 years ago. So this was a tremendous amount of growth that I've seen in the past 5 years. Right now, I think is perhaps also twofold. One, I think CA is doing really well in terms of trying to be nested in the IA environment. So I think to me, CA is the best conduit between DoD and DOS. So because I think what they do is naturally more strategic than tactical, right? So I think CA is doing right, in terms of realizing that, interagency nested operations. And what they do really right now is also being the tip of the spear for 39 efforts. Because to me, 39 efforts really depend on how well you map and illuminate your sort of, surrounding environment.
Yeah.
And I think CA does it better than anybody else when it comes to essentially illuminating your cognitive environment to essentially better tailor and calibrate our 39 efforts overseas, right? So this is
39 meaning the psychological operations efforts.
Information operations.
Information. Oh, generally.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. So because I think to me, those two things are related, but not reducible, because to me, good, information operations require good local mouthpieces.
Right.
And I think CA is better at finding those local influencers better than anybody else. And in what areas do I think that CA can improve? Not a lot, but there are a couple of areas. One is that right now, I think great power competition is really pivoting hard toward open source intelligence, because I don't think we want to go mano a mano with the PRC. I don't think the Kremlin wants to go mano a mano with us anywhere in the world, especially during and after this pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of this great power competition will take place in the information environment. And right now there is just so much data out there. Traditional analytics are not sufficient to take advantage of what people call big data. Up to this point, CA has done a great job in terms of working with social media platforms and doing social network analysis. Great stuff. I think the next step would be data science. I think CA should own data science. So I know CA essentially employs a lot of data scientists to supplement their skill sets. But I think, CA actually should own data science moving forward. And I think it should be part of their pipeline very soon, because without that, we cannot understand what kind of information environment we are in. So I think that's one thing that I want to sort of harp on.
Yeah, I mean, the data scientist, though, that is it takes a high degree of training and specialization to do that properly. And so, I guess you'd have to have some select senior non-commissioned officers. And this is where we were trying to push for warrant officers to do some of this type of work. We tried to I know Tom Datelsky and myself and some others have tried to push this in the past, and we were met with some resistance at SWIC. Seems like that might be the niche for warrant officers to do data science.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure you're familiar with the Grayscale program. So we've done it before. So it is in our training, DNA. We've done it before. We can set aside a few talented people to specialize in this exquisite skill set, and then essentially forward deploy them, and then just start running this pipeline on a continuous basis. So I don't think it's as onerous as we think it is. If the need is there, we can go after it. One thing, this is a tiny bit of that, that CA can improve, and that is, I think CA can improve is integrated, ConOps, so to speak. And I know, we do a much better job at, training our guys before they deploy on integrated country strategies and interagency, etiquette and, language, all that good stuff. We are doing much better in this space than before. But I feel like, CA is still a little bit shy in terms of pushing its own ConOps, because I think there is this still small mindset that we're trying to enable and support other main efforts. I think we need to flip that mindset, especially in an OD tech environment within the context of great power competition. To me, CA is the main effort, right? And everything else, right?
Yeah, I'm liking everything you're saying.
Well, I'm serious. Because when you're not fighting, right? What is the main tool? It's engagement, right? And essentially having more friendly networks and individuals in a given location than our peer adversaries. This is the main front line of great power competition. And CA has been a little bit shy to essentially push its own integrated carnops, thinking that their carnops are supportive of something other, right? We need to flip that mindset because great power competition requires that engagement is the primary front line, everything else. So we may do ops, we may drop bombs, we may do JSAT, but we do all of those things to support strategic engagement so we can have a bigger slice of that pie compared to our peer competitors. So I think that is a tiny bit of improvement I want to see from the
I love
CA
it.
community.
No, and like we had talked about before, and what the work we've done with General Cleveland on trying to build a theoretical framework for special warfare, I think that work needs to continue, and we need to crack it open and cohere this framework better with not just civil affairs, but the information related capabilities and cyber, and how do you bring all these effects together to bear on our problems, especially in this space between peace and war, this gray zone or whatever you want to call it. So
Yep.
we got a reading list that we're pushing out here soon.
Yeah.
What are some thought leaders and books that you're reading right now that our community should read?
So I thought about this really hard and I want to be really concise. So
Let's
do it this way. Who are the leaders that I follow? So when it comes to leaders, when it comes to the CCP, I follow H.R. McMaster. He has been the X-Men when it comes to great power competition. So, yes, everybody should follow H.R. McMaster when it comes to great power competition. When it comes to emerging technology, I follow P.W. Singer, the guy who just did a webinar with me. And then when it comes to China, I recommend Mike Pillsbury, 100th Year Marathon. I think he's a great guy to follow. When it comes to organizational agility, I strongly recommend that you guys follow Christopher Fussell at McChrystal Group and Stanley McChrystal. And they've been really active, helping large organizations cope with the pandemic. So they've been very active. So there's a lot to learn from. And I want to recommend a few books, before we call it done. So when it comes to the future of warfare, everybody should read Like War by P.W. Singer about 5 times. He has a new book that just came out. Yeah, he has a new
I read
book.
Ghost Fleet. I read Ghost Fleet about 5 times. I mean, it's such a
there
great
you
book.
There you go. He has a new fiction that just came out, Born In. So that's a great book to read. So H.R. McMaster has a new book coming out. It's called Battlegrounds: The Fight to Defend the Free World. I think I saw an early version of it, and I provide some feedback to H.R. McMaster. It's a great book.
Great.
It's going to go down as one of the classics of our time. And when it comes to the Kremlin, The Red Web by Irina Borogan. It came out about 3 years ago, but it's a phenomenal book in terms of how the Kremlin has weaponized the internet and the cyber domain. So it's a must read for all soft leaders and soldiers. And then I'd like to add just one more book for those who really care about special warfare, and it's called Twitter and Tear Gas: The Power of Fragility of Network Protests by Zeynep Tufekci, Tufekci. It came out also about 3 years ago, but one thing that I want to leave you with is this notion that great power competition will take place in the nexus between powerful states and non-state actors. So we need to approach social movements both for defensive and offensive purposes. Guys at SOCPAC, they always ask me, hey, the CCP is doing all kinds of projects along the Mekong River, and they're weaponizing water, and also they're using these projects to bribe and co-opt local authorities. They may turn against our strategic interests. What do we about this? Well, there are a lot of social movements taking place against this project, and this is
amplify those grievances.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, we can essentially look at this, movements and grievances as a way of imposing a lot of new costs on our peer adversaries, right?
Lots of friction for them.
There you go.
Yeah.
And it slows down the adversarial machine. And to
Slow down
me,
their Netflix productions there, their movies.
exactly. That is essentially a critical aspect of great power competition. So, we have a way of looking at irregular groups as something we need to control and squash. In great power competition, I think it should go the other way around. So those are some of the recommendations I have for you.
This has been incredible, Duan. I really appreciate it. A lot of gold dust in this discussion that I'm sure everyone's going to value. So thank you so much for your time.
Anytime.
Really appreciate it.
With Tesla Government's knowledge management solutions, you are adding a strategic partner that helps unleash the full power and potential of your institutional information. Let us unpack your data and put your knowledge to work. Learn more at teslagov.com.
If you enjoyed this podcast and others, please remember to subscribe and hit like so the 1CA podcast team gets important feedback and support. The Civil Affairs Association is a proud sponsor of the 1CA podcast and the Eunomia Journal. You can find more podcasts like this on www.1capodcast.org. Again, that's www.1capodcast.org. The Eunomia Journal is expanding its content to reach a broader audience and engagement across defense and governments to include other partners in allied countries. New sections in the Warrior Scholar Corner and the Team Room aim to deliver content useful to our members. Check out the Eunomia Journal at www.eunomiajournal.com. Again, that's www.eunomiajournal.com. If you are not a member yet, please visit the main CA Association website and find a new range of membership options. Starting with cadets and midshipmen, membership is only $10 a year. We then have our basic annual membership at $40 per year and 2 years at $60, or finally, a 3-year membership for only $80. Our most popular and best value option is a lifetime membership at a one-time price of $200. Be a member and don't miss out. 2020 is a big year with transformational changes underway. Lots of new opportunities for members. Don't miss out.
Thank you for spending some time with us. Please subscribe and come back for another installment of 1CA. Until then, be safe and secure the victory.